Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Anti-Doping Podcast, brought to you by the Partnership for Clean Competition. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and today we are joined by our guest, Greta Neimanas. Listeners, Greta is an elite education coordinator at the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, or USADA. She is a two-time Paralympian and two-time world champion cyclist with U.S. Paracycling. And today we are looking forward to discussing her career, her work at USADA, and the role of education in clean sport. So welcome to the show, Greta. We're thrilled to have you with us. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm excited to learn more about you and your career, but perhaps we'll start with you first. So can you tell me and our listeners more about yourself and how you got interested in sport and cycling specifically?
I was super lucky. I was always really active and involved in lots of sports when I was growing up. Primarily, I played soccer, but I grew up in the city of Chicago and was just really fortunate. There were a lot of adaptive sports opportunities for me to take advantage of. I grew up with my disability, which is maybe a little bit unique for some para athletes that acquire a disability later in life. But from childhood, I was part of the Rehab Institute of Chicago. Now it's the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. And they had an amazing youth sports program. So I grew up, I got to interact with Paralympians and had them as role models. So I always knew about elite sport from a really young age. And from that young age, I mean, probably 6 years old, I wanted to be a professional athlete. Oh, cool. And through RIC, now the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, through that program in U.S. Paralympics, I entered an essay contest when I was in high school. And the aim of that program, it was called the Paralympic Academy. And the aim of that program was to get student athletes more involved in adaptive sports and into those pipeline programs. So I was one of 6 kids that was selected to attend the Athens Games in 2004. And track cycling was one of the events that we watched. The moment we walked into the velodrome, I was obsessed. It just melted my 16-year-old brain that this was a sport. I distinctly remember standing at the top of the velodrome and looking down the banks. And for anybody who's not familiar with the velodrome, it's essentially like a mini NASCAR track or a gigantic wooden bowl that cyclists ride their bikes around in an oval with no brakes, only one gear. And I just thought that was the coolest sport that I had ever seen, and I wanted to try it. So it was that exposure when I was in high school that kicked off a whole series of events for me.
Well, I love your story, and I think it's particularly remarkable because, as you alluded to, you only started cycling in 2004, but then just 4 years later, Greta, you were competing at the Paralympic Games, which is amazing. So can you share your athletic journey and how you went from this novice track cyclist to the world-class athlete that you became in just a few years?
It's definitely a non-traditional experience, but I think what really set me up for that path was having that foundation of athletics and being pretty a general athlete at that time. I was highly coachable. I had experience in primarily soccer, but through RIC and through those adaptive sports programs, I went kayaking and rock climbing and had so many exposures to different sports that I think played into being a generalist in a lot of ways. And then I also had a local club, a local cycling club in Chicago. So let me back up a moment. After coming back from the Athens Games, like I said, I became obsessed with the sport of track cycling and just got on the computer and started searching for resources around me in Chicago. And I was able to get connected with a cycling club in Chicago, XXX Racing, and they had a juniors specific program. So in cycling, juniors are just any rider age 18 or younger. And they had a dedicated juniors program. There also happened to be a velodrome outside the city. And I just dove in head first. So through that club, they had a mentorship program. They had coaches for the juniors that helped us train. They really welcomed us into the sport. And not everybody gets that great experience right from the start. I mean, I had so many people, so many friends and club members that just wanted to support and wanted to help, whether it be training or loaning me equipment as I started racing more. It's an expensive sport. I was in high school. I didn't have any money. So I was able to get connected almost immediately with this really supportive community. I also was still in touch with some of those athletes that I met in Athens. They were excited that anybody was paying attention to their sport, I think. And we stayed in touch through email and phone calls. And that's how I kind of got fast tracked into that cycling development pipeline, because I just sent emails and was like, hey, I'm this random kid from Chicago who is now kind of obsessed with the sport. How can I do more? How can I get involved? And sort of inserted myself into some situations that, in hindsight, I was definitely in way over my head when I first got started in this pipeline, if you will, and just stuck it out. Maybe I shouldn't have been there at that exact time, but it worked out. And I managed to keep my head above water through that early stage of cycling.
Certainly. So when did the Paralympic Games start to look like a possibility for you?
It was certainly my goal from the start. I mentioned earlier that I always wanted to be a professional athlete, and I always knew about the Paralympics and that it was the pinnacle of sport. So it was always on the horizon, but I would say it didn't feel realistic until probably 2008. I had gone to the World Championships in 2006 and 2007, but it really wasn't until maybe the spring of 2008 where it seemed more realistic to be selected for the team. And I don't know exactly all of the selection process at that time. I don't remember, but made it. And what seemed like a very far off dream became a reality.
I think that's remarkable. And can you share what was that experience like for you now returning to the Paralympics on the athlete side of things this time?
It was pretty surreal being there as a competitor, as an athlete, with some of the folks who I saw race in Athens. They were now my teammates. They went from these godlike figures, watching them race, watching them compete. And then we were walking into the opening ceremonies together. We were getting fitted for our uniforms and going on training rides together. And it felt simultaneously really surreal, but also I was welcomed into that community with open arms. And I think all of the athletes on that team were just incredibly gracious to me as a young person. I was 20 at that time competing in Beijing. I don't know many 20-year-olds that have anything figured out. And so welcoming me as a 20-year-old, welcoming me as a new cyclist, I felt supremely grateful to be in their company and being so welcomed.
Definitely. Are there any other highlights from your athletic career that you'd like to share?
There are a lot. One of the things, it's funny now that I've been retired for about 10 years at this point, and people will sometimes ask me, what do I miss? Do I miss it? And I definitely loved and now miss the camaraderie that we had on the team. We actually still have a text group chat that a handful of cyclists are still in, and we kind of razz each other and we'll maybe talk a little bit of smack still to each other. Almost all of us are still retired. There's still one athlete who's training and competing, but that camaraderie was for sure a highlight. My husband actually was a teammate of mine, so we met through cycling. Our wedding officiant was another teammate. So I think a highlight, of course, there's travel and winning races is amazing, but having that core group of friends has just been so amazing. And I don't want to sound too sappy on this podcast here, but that really was, I think, my greatest takeaway from this.
I love that. And I love that you were giving us some insight into your life as an athlete. And I think the anti-doping system necessarily has to become a part of your life as an athlete. So can you talk about your experiences with the anti-doping system when you were in competition as an elite athlete?
I had a very positive experience overall with the anti-doping system. When I started out in the testing pool, I think the first year I was in the testing pool was either 2007 or 2008. But at that time, they were starting to transition from paper whereabouts to digital whereabouts. And I probably sound like that old has-been athlete of back in my day. It was so much harder, blah, blah, blah. But overall, it really was a positive experience. And actually, my coach at the time, his wife worked for USADA at the time, still works for USADA. And so I was kind of voluntold to test out some of their first draft digital filing systems I was living at the training center. Again, I was 18, 19 years old, didn't have a whole lot else going on besides training. I was taking a couple classes. I think it was actually put into my training calendar of go to USADA and test out some of their new digital systems. So I feel like I got exposed to that and have been involved for a very long time in the anti-doping system as an athlete, but then also kind of as an advocate and now as an educator. But thinking back to my time as an athlete, I took it very, very seriously to be competing at that high level and all the responsibilities that go along with it, right? Not taking unnecessary medication, checking any medications prohibited status. I distinctly remember being in the pharmacy with a head cold or allergies and looking at the time, a paper prohibited list to look up ingredients in this cold medicine to make sure that it was okay for me to take. Filing and updating whereabouts, it can all be annoying and stressful at times, for sure. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's part of being a high-level athlete. And I think about it now as kind of any job, whether you're an athlete or a guest on a podcast or an educator or a construction worker, every job has administrative tasks that aren't very fun, but they're part of the job and need to get done. Vacuuming my house is not something that I really look forward to, but it needs to get done. Right. And it's really not that big a deal to update your whereabouts, especially now everybody has a smartphone. You can just send an email or an update. But I did. I took it really seriously because it was important to me to have my career conducted and competed in the right way, I guess. You know, I wanted to, at the end of the day or at the end of the season, be able to look back and whether I won or not, know that everything I did and all of the successes that I had were because it was really me doing those things.
Definitely. And I really like, Greta, how you frame this commitment to clean sport as something that was just part of your job responsibilities as an elite athlete. I think that's a really helpful way to think about it. So it doesn't feel like as much of a burden. It's just, like you said, the admin tasks that you have to do. And I think this is something where, unfortunately, not everybody shares that same commitment to clean sport. So for you, how did knowledge that other athletes on the field may be doping impact how you thought about competition and your own commitment to clean sport?
Definitely when I started out, I was naive or wearing rose-colored glasses, however you might want to think about it. But for better or worse, cycling has a very public and open history of doping. I wasn't thinking about that when I fell in love with this sport. I was thinking about how fun it was to go fast on a bike and spend time with my friends in the mornings, evenings, or long rides on weekends. But as I got more deeply involved in the sport, I started learning more about that history. And it was really important to me, as I said, to compete in a fair and honest way. Growing up playing club and school soccer, sportsmanship was just always a really important value of mine. That golden rule, I wanted to treat my competitors with respect because I wanted to be treated with respect too. I wanted to compete clean. Yes, it's the right thing to do, but then also knowing that when I did win, the handful of times where I was on the top of that podium, that it really was me and not some substance that gave me an advantage. There's this phrase definitely within sports, and I think it's becoming more common outside of sports, right? It's controlling what you can control. And I couldn't control what my competitors were doing, how much they were training, if they were following the rules or not. I had to rely on the system to ensure that they were and that they were making good decisions. I couldn't control the decisions that they made, but I could control what I was doing, the decisions I was making, what I was or was not putting into my system as an athlete, and had to trust and hope that they were also doing the right thing.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really helpful way to think about it as well, just focusing on what you have control over and not dwelling on what everybody else is doing. So in your career, did you have any other situations specifically related to anti-doping that maybe sparked your interest in terms of wanting to pursue this further after retiring?
It's funny because when I was competing, maybe it's not funny, but when I was competing, anti-doping and clean sport was an element of my job at that time, but I did not expect to work in anti-doping after retirement. I just kind of thought I would transition into coaching or some other field, but it did not cross my mind to get a job within this system or within this field. until after I was retired. And sort of like my entrance into cycling, I feel like my entrance into anti-doping work and advocacy has been in some ways accidental, but also a combination of kind of having unexpected opportunities and saying yes to them. So when I retired, I was not prepared at all. I was 27. I knew, of course, that I would retire from my sport eventually, but I had a number of crashes and concussions over the course of my career that ultimately ended my career short. So after that, as I said, I was not prepared. I hadn't gotten a degree. I wasn't finished with school. That was something that I had planned to pursue after or later in my competitive career. So I really struggled to find my path and find that next thing, that next chapter. And one of the ways that I approached this, and maybe this will be helpful for other athletes or folks at a kind of a turning point in their life or career, is I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I decided to say yes to every opportunity that presented itself. At that time, I was already involved in some athlete advocacy. I was on the Team USA Athletes Commission as a representative for paracycling. And through that, I was elected to be a representative on the UCI's, the International Cycling Union's Athlete Commission. And then from there, so this is kind of like a leapfrogging process here, but from there, I was appointed to the World Anti-Doping Agency's Athlete Committee. So that was really my first experience specifically within anti-doping advocacy rather than individual compliance as an athlete. And this was in early 2017. So thinking back to that time, it was right around the time when the Russian scandal was coming to light. And at that time, it was a great group of athletes on the WADA AC. The group was really involved and very active in working for positive change. And I did not expect to have this affinity for the system, but through that work and through being on the WADA AC, I learned that I really liked the complexity of the system. It can be frustrating, but it's also sort of like a puzzle that can be solved or cracked in some way. So I really liked that work. I really liked learning about the system and working with the people involved. From there, then I started really getting more involved directly with USADA as an athlete presenter, so a contracted educator. I gave presentations to athletes, and through that kind of immersion, became a subject matter expert for the Team USA Athletes Commission. So I was able to stay in very close contact with USADA staff through that advocacy work. And then I had worked officially for some other nonprofits. But when this opportunity came up to join the USADA team full time last summer, I started in August, I jumped on it. And it has been a wonderful fit. And I feel like many of my experiences have come together to lead me to this position and this experience and moment in time.
Definitely. And I really appreciate your candor, Greta. I think being able to say, I didn't really have a plan when I retired is really important for people to hear.
Oh, I had no idea. I didn't even have a piece of blank paper to write a plan in the future. I was so unprepared, completely unprepared. And I do not recommend that to any athlete. As you are going through your career, you don't know when that career might be cut short or when you need to take a different path. So plan ahead, people. Here's my unsolicited advice.
And embrace those opportunities. I really like the advice that you gave of just say yes to whatever opportunities come your way. I think that can really help people make these decisions of what do I like to do? What's a good fit? And it sounds like you found a great fit there at USADA. So let's talk about your role. We mentioned your title. You're an elite education coordinator. What does this role entail?
My role is split between the education team and the science team at USADA. So part of my role is to educate athletes at various levels, juniors, elite, masters, on the rules, responsibilities, their rights, and resources within the whole system. And then I also spend time with the science team to do more specific education to health professionals. So those team doctors, trainers, physios. The athletes have been the focus of education for years, understandably, right? But over the last few years, I'll be kind of general there, we've also learned that all of those athlete support personnel, not just the health providers, but also coaches and managers, athlete agents, all of those athlete support personnel also need and really benefit from anti-doping education because they have direct influence on athlete careers. So because of that, we're trying to strengthen the relationships with different groups like the National Athletic Training Association, the American College of Sports Medicine, existing team doctors. I recently gave a presentation to emergency room doctors at one of the USOPC's designated medical network locations. So just trying to bring different entities and different groups of athlete support personnel and specifically healthcare professionals up to speed and educating them on anti-doping.
Definitely. And I think this multifaceted approach to education is really important for anti-doping because there are so many different stakeholders. So let's maybe dive into some of the details of these different education programs. Greta, can you talk about USADA's different education programs that are offered right now?
We have several. I want to start off talking about True Sport. Maybe some of the listeners are familiar with this, but True Sport is a program that focuses on, I would say, foundational values-based education for not just athletes, but coaches, parents, teachers, anybody that's involved in those early stages of an athlete sport experience. So not just youth sports, but also developing sports can really benefit from True Sport lessons, kind of moving maybe through the athlete career development pipeline. Athletes Advantage is one of our programs that we have as well. It's an e-learning program for athletes that are in the testing pool. They're maybe competing at a higher level, so they can learn about those more specific rules and regulations that they are held to, now being at that higher level of national or international level of competition. So they learn more specifics about prohibited substances and checking medications against the prohibited list, whereabouts filings, that sort of thing. Whereas True Sport might emphasize not taking shortcuts instead of explicitly don't take performance enhancing drugs. So similar message, but slightly different wording for those different populations. We also have Coaches Advantage. That's similar to the Athletes Advantage, but it is aimed at coaches, as the name implies, and athlete support personnel. So athlete support personnel are held to rules and regulations under the code. Things like no tampering, no trafficking, no administering of prohibited substances, that sort of thing. And they have rules because they can also be held accountable or sanctioned under the anti-doping code for those anti-doping rule violations. Finally, we have the Health Professional Advantage. This is another e-learning course that's designed for health professionals and how they can support athletes as medical providers in an athlete's life. So it's designed for health pros, but it is free and available to anybody. We work with Stanford to host this 6 modules, self-paced, free e-learning course. And then depending on your profession, you can use it for continuing education units. We are always trying to think of ways to better educate and make it easier for athletes to find the rules and regulations, to find their resources and information on their rights within this system. And I think USADA has done a really good job with these education programs, but we're always open to feedback and suggestions on how we can improve and how we can make being a part of this system easier for clean athletes and athlete support personnel.
I think that's wonderful. And I think for a lot of people, the education system and just learning in general, sometimes you have to hear something multiple times for it to really stick. So Greta, can you talk about how USADA approaches this, like a one-time course that people take? Are there refreshers and updates? How does that work?
So True Sport is always coming out with new articles and lessons. Kind of those bite-sized pieces of education are getting updated constantly. The landscape is changing and evolving, and we are working to keep up. So True Sport does a great job of coming up with new articles or essays about different topics, how to deal with setbacks or failure as an athlete or a coach, how to build your resilience. Our science team, they're researching and writing publications as well as putting things onto our website, articles about specific substances, GLP-1s, for instance, or spironolactone is a specific substance that some athletes have gotten into trouble with. So we're constantly putting out information in those bite-sized articles. And then our e-learning courses are required learnings. We have refresher courses for athletes and coaches who have taken the course previously. So sort of a mini module if they have recently completed the full course that would include any updates to the code or prohibited list, things like that. So The anti-doping code, the WADA code, is going to be changing. Starting in 2027, will be under a new code. So these courses will be getting a big overhaul. This is one of our team's big projects for the year, is to incorporate all of the updates and changes that are coming in the 2027 code into all these e-learning platforms. So definitely keep an eye out. If you are in the testing pool or you're just a curious listener, definitely keep an eye out on our website and through our e-learning platforms, because these are going to be getting updated this year.
Well, it sounds like an exciting and busy time, Greta.
Yes, a lot of time for me, a new experience learning these new platforms, developing e-learning courses. So it's fun.
Certainly. And I know USADA, in addition to having these education courses, you also have general education and I guess information that you share with athletes and the general public. And I think one of the things that USADA promotes that I think is important is this food first approach to nutrition. So can you talk a little bit about this approach and how it can help athletes reach peak performance while they're also maybe reducing their risk for exposure to banned substances?
Absolutely. I'm from the Midwest. We like to eat. So I'm all about the food first approach, just personally as an individual. But essentially what we mean when we talk about a food first approach is that athletes can get all of their nutritional needs from whole, real foods instead of capsules or powders. Right? Foods are regulated in a higher standard than supplements are. And so it's a really easy way for athletes especially, but anybody else, to reduce risks of contamination through supplements. So unintentional doping or contamination, it's a problem. And eating real foods, having that food first approach is a really easy way to reduce unnecessary risks. Of course, there are exceptions if an athlete has a diagnosed mineral or vitamin deficiency. I'm not talking about that, but instead of maybe taking a fish oil capsule, could you eat a piece of fish instead? And you're not only getting omega-3s or something, but you're also getting other nutrients. And so one of our publications that we have on our website is a supplement guide as well as a nutrition guide that I think puts some of those comparisons in a really digestible, no pun intended, but a really digestible way for athletes and their family members to make some healthier and less risky decisions. So supplements and contamination or outright inclusion of prohibited substances in supplements, it's a risk that personally I think is unnecessary. But this food first approach is one of the easiest ways to reduce risk for athletes.
Certainly. And as you alluded to, relevant not only for athletes, but also their families and just the general health. I think this is an important message and this education can be really valuable.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And I know we talked about your athletic career and we talked about this transition to working at USADA, but I think these are not two separate lives here. Greta, how does your athletic career and your experiences as an athlete inform or inspire the work that you're doing right now at USADA?
I feel so grateful to have had the career and the life experiences that I've had. Sport has given me so much in my life. It has afforded me the opportunity to travel the world. Because of bikes and cycling, I've been to 6 different continents. I've not gone to Antarctica yet, but maybe there will be a cycling event there to go to every continent. But sport has given me so much in my life. And my role here at USADA and anti-doping advocacy work, it's a way for me to stay connected to sport and work to make it a little bit better and easier for the athletes that are competing now, as well as helping to lay foundations for future athletes to have a better system, however that might look, whether it's less invasive testing or easier whereabouts updating or just greater transparency across the whole system. I think that being able to leave sport a little bit better than when I entered it, that is really important to me. And when I was an athlete, I tried to have that mentality of how can I leave some type of mark on cycling to make things better for future cyclists. And I feel like with this work, I get to do that and stay connected to sport in a different way that's not being an athlete or not being a coach. There is so many different professional roles within greater sports that are not coaching that I think athletes or sports fans can consider if looking to get involved in the sports world. There is a whole world in anti-doping, but teams also need managers and logistics specialists and data analysts. All of that now falls underneath the sport umbrella. I just think it's really, really cool and full of great opportunities.
Definitely. And I think the work that you're doing now, Greta, is directly impacting athletes every single day. And you mentioned a few examples from your own experiences, but what are some of the things that athletes are most concerned about right now when it comes to anti-doping education?
You don't know what you don't know. So one of the things that I try to do is giving all of the information that they need without overwhelming them or causing unnecessary stress. Unfortunately, it's impossible to eliminate risks of supplement contamination or environmental contamination, but we can educate on real ways to reduce that risk. A food-first approach, for instance. Athletes are not dumb, but are often treated that way in different aspects of their sporting careers. And I think educating in a respectful way, in a transparent way, is crucial. It is more complex now than it was 10 years ago when I was competing. Online pharmacies can ship directly to an athlete's door with one click. And many of them, right, the vast majority of online pharmacies are operating illegally in some capacity. And I think being open and transparent with risks to the athletes, I think, is really important when it comes to educating.
Absolutely. And are there any specific concerns right now that you and the team at USADA are thinking about and maybe considering working into the education program?
One of the things that we have recently incorporated in our education sessions kind of ties into online pharmacies, but it's research chemicals. So it falls very generally underneath supplements, but there are different substances that can be purchased online through different social media influencers, personal shops. But these are substances that are not approved for human or even veterinary or animal consumption, that haven't been researched completely or appropriately, but they are available through online stores. So this is one example of a new thing that our investigations team has gotten inquiries about, reports about, that they have informed us on, and we are now trying to educate athletes on these risks. Is everybody going to be targeted in their social media? Probably not, but some might be. And understanding those risks and the realities that you don't know what you're purchasing from this online store. Don't take it. Eliminate that risk is one way that we're trying to stay on top of it and implement as quickly as possible new information that we're getting.
I think that's really important. And you mentioned that these research chemicals have not been researched. And I think this research, this science is tremendously important to ensuring that we're sharing the best possible information with everyone through education. So can you talk a little bit about why, for you in your role, it's so important to continue to advance anti-doping science and how these new findings that are coming out from anti-doping research are ultimately informing USADA's education programs there?
Technology is advancing so quickly. And it's crucial for us on the education team to keep up and educate athletes and athlete support staff accordingly. One example that I'll give is the dried blood spot or the DBS testing. I think this is a great way for less invasive tests for athletes. Scientists and trained professionals are researching this and different ways that we can make tests easier, faster, less expensive, less invasive for the athletes to only take a couple droplets of blood instead of multiple vials. Another is the increase in GLP-1 usage and how those GLP-1s may or may not improve performance, right? Our science team is researching those. They're currently on the WADA watch list. GLP-1s are on the monitoring list. And again, I've learned about the research chemicals and online pharmacies from past episodes of the PCC podcast.
Oh, thank you.
But also our investigations team, because athletes are starting to get into trouble with them. So it's a good opportunity, I think, for us on the education team to work with different stakeholders and different teams in this whole system, right? Investigations and science, communications, we're all working together to keep up and make sure that athletes are as informed as they can be.
Well, good. I think that's the perfect segue because I wanted to get into next some of these collaborations, some of these different ways that you do work with other stakeholders, because I think anti-doping and clean sport, this is a team effort here. So how do you in your current role collaborate with others, including the PCC and the work that you're doing every day?
We talk a lot and we are constantly updating each other on what we're learning, what we're finding out, what questions we're being asked in education sessions. I feel super lucky that I get to work with folks on so many different teams: supplements, science, drug reference, doping control operations, investigations. I get to work with all of these different teams and learn what issues are coming up. And we are just constantly updating each other. Research chemicals, GLP-1s, questions about anti-aging or wellness clinics and IV usage. We get questions about that in some of our education sessions. I always try to plug the work of others so that athletes can know how much good work is going on their behalf. What is getting funded by the PCC? What is the science team researching and writing articles on? How are doping control operations teams updating their practices to find athletes and get those tests done as quickly and efficiently as possible? So most simply, we talk a lot.
I love that. And I think that communication is so important to ensuring that all of these different pieces come together smoothly to ensure that sport happens smoothly, but also that the athlete experience is taken into consideration. And it sounds like that's something that you are keeping in mind and working into the work that you're doing every day.
Certainly trying to.
Definitely. Well, we appreciate your efforts. And Greta, I know we've talked about a lot of different aspects of sport and clean sport and anti-doping in our conversation today, but I know a lot of problems remain that we're all working very hard together to solve. So if we took away the barriers that typically would hold you back and you had all of the resources you could dream up, is there a particular problem in anti-doping that you would most want to solve?
Ooh, one thing I wish would change is a general lack of transparency, I think, across the international anti-doping space, right? We're all invested in this system. We have all agreed to the rules. And the expectation is that we agree to these rules. So when anything inconsistent happens, I think people deserve to know why. I feel like USADA does a great job at this. We disclose why people are sanctioned, how long their sanction is, what happened. And we even send letters of negative test results, right? So good test results with no adverse analytical findings. We send letters to the athletes after they get tested so they can have that peace of mind. And I think that transparency really goes a long way because when people don't have information, it's human nature, I think, to kind of make up something that you want to have answers on. So that's one thing, not a resource related issue, but in a more practical sense, resources, no issue. Mm-hmm. I would like to see that DBS, that dried blood spot technology improve, possibly even getting to the point where blood draws aren't needed. Maybe urine collection will become outdated and obsolete. The reality is tests, whether it be urine or blood, are invasive and stressful. No matter how many times you've gone through it, it's like, oh, okay, I'm getting tested. Let's go do this. My day has been interrupted in some degree. Yes, it is a requirement. Yes, it is the reality and that administrative element of being a professional athlete. But I think if we can reduce that, those stresses, and even just the time, the efficiency, I think that would be a massive win. And thinking back, if I could have done a blood test where it was 3 or 4 droplets of blood instead of a couple vials, I would have felt a lot better about that. So I would love to see that technology improve and advance.
Certainly. Well, Greta, you brought up some really good points in your response here. And I think throughout our conversation, you shared some wonderful advice and insights about your experiences there at USADA and as an athlete. So if our listeners are intrigued and they want to learn more about you and more about what you do, what is the best way for them to get more information?
We have a monthly newsletter folks can sign up for. We have different topics each month, as well as a library of articles on our website. Both USADA.org and TrueSport websites have an extensive library of different articles. In addition to a monthly newsletter that gets sent right to your inbox, you can also follow us on social media platforms. We are on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and X. And across all of our platforms, our social handle is at US Anti-Doping. So follow online, read our articles, sign up for the newsletter, and learn more and stay connected.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing those resources. Listeners, definitely take some time to peruse the USADA and the TrueSport websites to learn more and also get connected on social media, join their mailing list. Greta, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show today, and we really appreciate you joining us and sharing your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope maybe I'll come back one day.
Oh, we hope to welcome you back again. Yeah. It's been wonderful to chat with you, listeners. Great to have you here with us as well. Please note that the Anti-Doping Podcast features a wide variety of clean sport experts, and episodes may include statements and or viewpoints that do not necessarily reflect the views or values of the PCC. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Anti-Doping Podcast.